Are we talking the apostles that were like martyred and stuff? Then well, I mean, like, they might have had a harder time.
Do you think evangelization looks different than it did for the apostles?
Yes, I think so. I mean, especially like back then you were kind of converting from one faith to another. Nowadays you're converting a lot of times from no faith to faith. I think they were more tied to their beliefs because they were less tied to like the secular culture that we have now. I mean, I think maybe converting is harder today, but I think the apostles had it a lot harder since people were trying to kill them. And like it's just like, you're Catholic, oh, you're just like a weird sect off to the side, but that's it. So definitely the apostles.
Are we talking the apostles that were like martyred and stuff? Then well, I mean, like, they might have had a harder time. But I guess it's hard in its own way today. Culturally, the culture is kind of against like Christianity or just like some of our Christian like ways of going about living. It's very radical and different.
It's trying to come to people where they're at and being able to reach them. So the apostles had all of those years of traditions and all of the laws that made them skeptical of Jesus as the Messiah. And then today people are skeptical about religion at all. So I think it is just a different challenge, but the same difficulty.
It's all about relationships. I think that's kind of one of the key aspects of our faith too, is it's all about love. It's all about building connections and relationships and that are faith centered. And I brought like 3 new people to Mass with me tonight. And for some of them, it was their first time. For some of them, they're kind of Catholic, but they're coming back. And just to be able to like share this experience, I think that's another thing I love about Last Chance Mass is it's approachable for a lot of people. So yeah, I think building connections and just making the faith approachable for people, because
that's one thing I am proud about Last Chance Mass is it's not intimidating. I think walking into a parish by yourself on a Sunday as a college student would be quite intimidating. But here you've got other college students who, and even our seminarians are out there and saying, hey, have you been to Mass today? Would you like to come? And the response would be, oh, I'm not Catholic. And it's like, well, that's not what I asked you. Do you want to come to Mass and pray and meet some other people? And so that's one thing that we want to perpetuate and keep part of the culture at Last Chance Mass is make it approachable. Something I do before the Mass is to do a little catechesis to explain the readings and try to teach young people that the Word of God has power. And if we're attentive to it, open our hearts to the Word of God, that it can transform us and then dispose us to even receive the greater gift of the Eucharist, of God dwelling within us through the Blessed Sacrament. So these are our evangelists out there as well. Love it.
It can seem a little daunting at times, but it's honestly a welcoming community, and I think people really value it once they realize that.
Yeah, it's definitely different. I think the approach that sometimes we take, which I don't know is always the best, but is like lead by example. But there's obviously different ways to go about it.
Lead by example is always good. Lead by example. You know, they only listen to teachers if they're first witnesses.
We live in a very polarized world, and it's easy to make quick judgments about people. On our end, like if people just see like, oh, they're Christian or they're Catholic, then they just usually just shut it down. And on our end, also, sometimes if we look, people are like, oh, they won't understand, this is not their wheelhouse, then we just like tend to shut people down really quickly, which is not cool.
I think it definitely looks a lot different today. Like she said, it's a lot more of a polarized world now. You know, it's really hard to compare generations. And, you know, if you read some of the spiritual writers from the years past, they'll say how busy they were at that time. And then you'll say, well, this was 1680 when they wrote this. This is before the iPhone and before email and before modern communication. And so I think that's just part of human life is a lot of stuff comes at us and life is full. I don't know if there was ever a time when you lived some bucolic life. You know, if you had this country parish in France, your name was Saint John Vianney, but you were also here in confession 18 hours a day, and he didn't have any time to eat. And that's what they said to the disciples, right? They had no time even to eat. So I think we can say that we live in a time that's stretching us so much, but now the iPhone probably is changing our brain.
New technologies probably is changing our brain in the way that we're thinking. But I think we've always had a busy time and a busy culture, and I don't think we should think ourselves as so special that we are that our time is worse than any others.
What do you think could push people away? Like if we're not careful?
I think
What I've seen is I think people are very scared of judgment, and they can kind of view the church as a place of judgment because they don't recognize God's love. And like, I feel like it's hard to understand God's like commandments without his love.
I think we need to do a lot better of a job of is leading with charity and love. And that's something I think Father Mike Schmitz does just super well. Just the way he like radiates this like
alumnus
love.
It's a beautiful thing about Christ in the City is that they're not bringing services to the people. They're just bringing an encounter and just want to know about the other person. And so there's this knowing and loving, which are the two qualities of God or the two activities in God. And so that's why it's such a pure encounter, is that it's not an exchange of goods and services, but it's simply meant to build a relationship and to try to witness the fact that it's good that another person exists, which is how Joseph Pieper defines love.
I think in terms of like technology, we just have a lot different reach than what they have. But like in terms of spreading like the word of God, we still have the same mission.
While there are the few that do go door to door, we just don't quite have as many as I would say like back when the apostles were around going and spreading the faith, which was constantly growing. We were just kind of cruising along as is.
What should evangelization look like today? Like if you could just, ideal situation.
I feel like people have lost their curiosity about and wanting to learn about different things that are outside their comfort zone. I feel like people are just more content on a false sense of happiness and just staying within their comfort zone. I feel like we need to reignite that curiosity and the unexplainable, where the only true answer is like God can only really truly answer that.
Just finding a way to be more inviting and more genuine so people actually want to connect.
I feel like people these days don't want to have conflict, which would maybe discourage them from trying to explore the faith.
These are deep thinkers. Deep thinkers. This is Sunday night at 10 p.m., and they are thoughtful answers.
So I think people are afraid to ask questions because it doesn't... asking a question invites questioning yourself, and some people aren't always ready in the moment to resolve, hey, what questions do I have? What questions do I have about this thing? Will it force me to change? And so people are scared to just cross that unknown and actually dive in. So I think in terms of how the faith shows up to people, that is a very polarizing thing. But okay, I'm not ready to cross this line yet, but I don't know how to engage with it otherwise, so I just choose not to engage at all. Faith,
Joe.
it's okay.
Joe. How you doing?
His phone's going off during the... Okay, it's a good shot. It's wonderful to know how much is active in their young minds, and it's beautiful to see them engaging the questions of life, and that we're a part of that on campus.
Were there any parts of that surprised you? Any remarks where you're like, okay, they hit it out of the park, like that was really on point?
I think some of the comments that they're making that really resonate with me are everything starts with a relationship, and people might be afraid of being judged, and that's one thing that a Catholic group on campus says: if you have rules without relationship, it equals rebellion. And so developing relationships with people, and then ultimately furthering their relationship with God, and then realize that God's this overflow of abundance of love, created in love, and that he wills our good, is then the context to understand how he's asking us to live through his commandments and through the church and being connected to him through the Eucharist. It's hard to compare evangelization based on different ages, but I think our culture is becoming less supportive. Just even the way that Sunday morning you have all these athletic events, whereas in years past you might have had athletic events start on Sunday afternoon because there's a general cultural recognition that Sunday morning people worship and people go to their church. And so I think culturally there's less support than there used to be in our culture for practice of the faith. And that's more similar to probably the early apostolic times when they were still establishing the Lord's Day as the day of worship.
Do you think we're still called to go out as boldly as the apostles did?
I think all of us need to be stretched. I think all of us need to be stretched out of our comfort zone. And we talk about the church as the mystical body. And as a body has different parts, we all have a role to play. But I think the common denominator of our apostolic work is that, or apostolic works, even the different parts that we play, is that we'll all be stretched beyond our comfort zone. And Jesus takes us beyond our own human capacities. And as St. Paul would say, so that other people wouldn't mistake that the surpassing greatness belongs to God and not to us. And so I think that's the common denominator, is that we're all going to be stretched and invited to go places where we couldn't do on our own human gifting.
Do you think persecution looks different today than it did back then?
Does martyrdom today look different than it did in years past? Well, the red martyrdom of people dying for their faith and the apostles is well documented, and that is happening in parts of the world. In the United States, it doesn't look like that. And what's the martyrdom in the United States? It might be business owners. It might be doctors who are asked to compromise their faith, and different tax laws, things like that, that would compromise our ability to provide, our Catholic's ability to heed his conscience and yet provide for his family. So there's going to be ways, and we know situations like this, business owners that have had to shutter their doors because they wouldn't compromise their faith. So martyrdom is not red necessarily in the United States now, but there are heroic people living their lives of Christian witness, and it's costing them a lot. But as St. Paul says, it's eternal. It's earning for us an eternal weight of glory, because life is short, eternity is long.
A lot of the stuff I hear from people is like conflicts in the workplace.
One way to live your faith in the workplace is that someone's personal experiences is so highly valued today, and this sense of tolerance. And so if you learn to articulate your faith experience as life-giving for you, as a joy of the gospel, that's going to be hard to argue against when the value of one's personal story or experience kind of trumps everything these days. So if we can live out of a place of authentic, genuine, how our life's been transformed by living the gospel, not that it's always easy, but witness to some kind of hope that is within you, I think that's convincing. And that'll help people and even invite them into that kind of relationship, that kind of meaning for their life.